Hi, I'm going to have a look at how to form a contract. One of the first elements to that is that we must have a legally binding agreement. Now, an agreement is made up of two parts. There must have been a valid offer that was properly accepted. Now, one of the key things to remember when it comes to making a contract is the principle of freedom of contract, that as consenting adults, we have the freedom to choose whether we enter into a contract or not, and the terms that we want to make that contract on. So when we make an offer, we can put whatever terms we wish in there, and then it's up to the other party to decide if they want to enter into that contract or not. So a couple of things first. Actually, a lot of students tend to get confused with something which isn't actually part of the offer. It is a pre-offer stage called the invitation to treat, and it works a bit like it sounds. It's an invitation for you to enter into the contract, and it's often you showing a willingness that you would like to enter into contract negotiation. So typical examples would be sort of adverts. Adverts that are just advertising things for sale can be misleading. So for example, in Fisher versus Bell, they were charged with offering for sale a flick knife, and actually it wasn't an offer, a shop display, shop window. That is an invitation to treat. We saw similar in Partridge versus Crittenden. So all those things is a pre-contractual stage. It's the buyer that would actually make the offer, and then it's up to the seller to decide whether to accept their custom. And this can be seen, for example, in licensing sales, alcohol, cigarettes, those sorts of things. So displays, of course, would now cover things like web pages, goods on a shelf, and this was why the case of Boots, the PSGB case, they said that actually the items on the shelves were simply all invitations to treat, and then the customer makes the offer at the counter, and that was overseen by a registered pharmacist like the law said it had to be. Auction lots are also invitations to treat. So when you see the auction items on display, or you're looking on a page on eBay, things like that, that is simply a willingness to say, I would like to sell this item. So some items may have a reserve price, which is a sort of minimum price. What they're saying is, I would like to enter into negotiations to sell my items, but I won't sell it less than this. And this is why they have the freedom to accept or reject any bid that they choose. It doesn't necessarily have to be the highest one, although of course it often would be. Mere inquiries are separate to that. So inquiries, just mere asking for information, has no impact on the offer and acceptance process. It's not a counter offer, it's simply a request for further information. So actual offers can be made by anybody, and they can even be sort of made and accepted by machines, which a lot of us do when we buy things like tickets from machines, vending machines, parking, like we saw in Thornton versus Shoe Lane parking. Offers can be either bilateral or unilateral, so many offers that we deal with will be bilateral. Bi meaning two sides have an obligation to do something in the contract. So for example, if you buy an item from a shop, you have contractual obligation to pay, they have a contractual obligation to supply the item. Something slightly different is a unilateral contract, and this is where adverts, you have to just be really careful to read exactly what they're saying. In the case of Carlisle versus Carbolic Smoke Ball, that was seen as a unilateral offer despite it being an advert in a newspaper. And the reason for that is because uni means one, and it is a one-sided obligation. Now, those offers can be made to the whole world, but they would only be accepted and there would only be an obligation to provide consideration for someone who has met the specific performance criteria. So in the case of Carlisle, they only had an obligation to pay people who bought the smoke ball, used it correctly, and still caught flu. And that's what Mrs. Carlisle did, and that's why they were obliged to pay her. Remember the opposite example from that case? They talked about a lost pet poster. No one is obligated to look for a pet if they see that poster. The reward, however, would be payable. They would have to pay the person who meets the specific performance criteria. So for example, taking back their lost pet. Offers have to be clearly communicated, and again, that's going to be quite obvious and helpful when it comes to determining freedom of contract. Was it quite clear what the terms of that contract were? So a few outcomes can happen once an offer has been made. So first off, of course, it can be accepted, and that would create that legally binding contract, assuming that other elements are present: intent to create legal relations and valid consideration on both sides. But generally speaking, acceptance must be positive and unqualified. That's due to the mirror image rule. So you must accept the exact terms that you were offered. Any change, any amendment, any ifs or buts are a counter offer. So a counter offer does two things. It always rejects the original offer. And don't assume you can go back to a previous offer. It rejects an offer and it presents a new offer to the other side. So again, for example, in exam scenarios, be really careful to check there is actually a rejection. So it may look like a person is accepting, but it could be a counter offer. There also has to be some sort of positive yes. There has to be some sort of agreement to those terms. And again, freedom of contract, you have to show willing that you wish to be bound in that agreement. And of course, that can be done by your words, but it can also be done by conduct. So we saw this in Revel versus Anatech, that by putting the items into the TV show MasterChef, that was them showing their agreement to the terms that they'd been sent. If they weren't happy, if they didn't want to agree, they wouldn't have put the products in MasterChef. It can't just be silence. And again, that's because freedom of contract, you have to indicate a willingness. However, there can be a collateral contract. So this can be a side contract where a person says, if I don't hear you from Friday, by Friday, that item is yours. Do you agree? Now, if you say yes, you're agreeing to the terms. You are agreeing to the fact that your silence will be a sign of approval. Now, this was not the case in Feldhaus versus Bindley when they were selling the horse. So if you just leave them hanging, if I don't hear from you by Friday, the horse is yours. There has to be some sort of positive agreement on the other side. They all have to be clearly communicated, and it could be that it was asked for in a specific way. So you could request that a person replies by post, by phone, and as long as there's no kind of significant burden by doing it in a different way, the courts will generally honour that. So acceptance usually begins when the offeror becomes aware of the acceptance. So that means they know that they're actually part of a binding agreement and there will be obligations for that to follow. So usually, it's very easy if someone says, yes, I accept, you are very aware that that's when it begins. And again, it has to be clearly communicated. But there are some exceptions where it'll start at a slightly different point. So we have the Postal Rule, which obviously affects when an acceptance is posted. And remember, it only applies to acceptance. It doesn't apply to offers. Acceptance will begin as soon as a letter of acceptance is put in the post box. The moment it's posted, both of the parties are part of a legally binding agreement. Now, that's quite significant. So what it means is that there has to be certain criteria for you to be able to show, for you to rely on that rule. So first off is obviously you've got to be able to prove that you posted it when you say you did, but also that it was the expected method of communication. So for example, if you'd previously communicated via letters, it becomes something that you're expecting. So they should be surprised if there is a delay due to the postal service, and that it was properly stamped, addressed. And in other words, the letter of acceptance should have gotten to you on time. It's not the offeree's fault if it didn't. It's down to delays in the postal service. What we're getting more, however, is more instantaneous methods of communication. So things like fax, email, electronic messaging. So those can be received very, very quickly and be sat in someone's inbox, but not checked for quite a while. So the way that the courts have handled those kind of situations is that acceptance is deemed to start from where and when the message was received into the inbox. So if you haven't checked your emails all day, it's not the other party's fault that that's been sent. Now, this is subject to sound business practice. And what that means is that rule applies assuming that you have sent your acceptance, email, text, whatever, within reasonable business hours. Now, of course, that's a very difficult thing to define. Different businesses have different business hours. So it's kind of what's going to be in general good practice. If a message was sent at 4 a.m, there is no expectation that someone else is going to be sat there receiving that at 4 a.m. So it generally will be the next sort of working day. Of course, they don't have to be accepted. You can withdraw your offer, and again, freedom of contract. If you made an offer, you are free to take it away anytime before it's accepted. So once it's accepted, we have that binding contractual agreement. You can either withdraw it yourself, it just has to be clearly communicated, again, that it's gone, and that can be through a reliable third party as well. So for example, if you've got a friend both of you know, or through a lawyer or agent or something like that. So the key is, have you effectively told that person the offer's gone? Are they aware it's gone? And you can do that even if you promise to keep it open. So in Dickinson versus Dodds, unless you have a collateral contract where you've given something to keep that offer open, that's not a guarantee, because again, you have freedom to withdraw it anytime you like. You can of course say no to an offer, and remember, a counter offer is essentially a rejection. It's a no, and once an offer is rejected, it can't be returned to. So it could be that you ask the offeror, actually, oh, I've changed my mind, can I say yes now? That's entirely up to them, and you're actually making a new offer. So once an offer's been withdrawn, don't assume you can go back to it. A contractual agreement may not happen if one of the parties dies. So for example, if the offeree dies, that's it. So an offeree dying is essentially rejecting the contract. So a family member could not then take up that on their behalf. And the reason for that is because the offeror has made very specific terms to that person. They may not wish to contract with anyone else, like the person's next of kin. Now, if the offeror dies, the offeree can actually still accept that contract, and then it will be up to the offeror's next of kin to make it happen, to do what the contract says. But that's only up until the point when the offeree becomes aware that the offeror's died. So if you know that the person's died, you can't then say yes. But if an offer has been made, for example, they've died after a letter's been posted, and then you put a letter in the postbox not realising that they've passed away, then that contract will still be valid and legally binding. Finally, contract offers don't last forever. They have to be accepted within a reasonable time if a specific fixed time wasn't made. So if I say you have until next Monday to decide, it is very clear that the offer will lapse next Monday. However, if a time limit is not stated, a reasonable time will apply. And again, you could give someone consideration to keep the contract open for longer, but they will naturally run out, and that depends very much on the subject matter. So if you remember the Montefiore case with the shares, share prices fluctuate all day long. So coming back to an offer that was made months ago wasn't seen as very reasonable. So as I said, once you've got a valid offer, and these are what a valid offer entails, and that was positively and unqualified acceptance, and again you have the rules, then you have that legally binding agreement. If that was made with intent to create legal relations, and if both parties have provided some sort of consideration to that, then we have an actual contract. Thanks for watching.